everyone. Okay? Why do you think they brought in a educational system? Why do you think they started up a world war a couple times? Okay? There's reasons for this. Give themselves some time. I think my reader, when he considers all these circumstances, must see that my theory of one universal empire and mythos will explain all the difficulties and that it alone can't explain them. Atlantis is the Hebrews. The Hebrews are Atlantis. The Israelites. All of that is intertwined. Directly in America. Mr. Humboldt, after showing that the Tower of Cholula was in every respect a close imitation of that described by Diodorus and Herodotus at Babylon, both in its form and in the astronomical uses to which it was applied, states, as if it was not doubted but a settled fact, that it was built after the time of Mohammed. At this time, the Tower of Belus had for many centuries been in ruins, and its country a perfect desert. This at once shows that no dependence can be placed in Mr. Humboldt's speculation on this subject, for surely no one will credit the recent date of this work, supposing even if it were built by immigrants from Egypt or from Chinese Tartary, in that age, after the time of Mohammed, which should induce either Jews or Christians to expand an immense sum of money or labor to build a Tower of Babel in Mexico or anywhere else. After the description of the Mexican pyramidal towers, Mr. Humboldt goes on to state that there are similar pyramidal towers in Virginia and Canada, containing galleries lined with stone. He states that the Temple of Xochicalco, accurately to face the four cardinal points, to be built of stone beautifully wrought, but without cement, each stone in the form of a parallelepiped. The Mexicans' large temple, placed on a conical hill called Xochicalco, meant, as they say, house of flowers. This is Saca, and Calix, which meant rose. The hill was excavated into large caves, wonderful to behold when it is considered, as it is there observed, that the Mexicans had no iron. An observation is made by Mr. Dupin that the Mexicans are now quite ignorant of the meaning of their proper names. It appears that the temple at Mexico is, in substance and fact, called the Temple of Sinate, C being pronounced as S, and thus making the Temple of Sin, or Sion, which will be explained in the book on letters. Lord Kingsborough calls it Sinai, or Sina. I feel little doubt that one of the first names of God in the first written languages, for reasons which I shall give when I explain the origin of letters in all nations, languages, and times, would be Divas. With its variety of forms, the next perhaps would be descriptive of 360. This might be described in various ways as TLI, equaling 360. The meaning of these three numbers would be glorious orb we daily behold, the sun, and God. For reasons which I shall assign, I suppose D as the first and the prevailing name of God during many generations. Afterward, when astronomy so much improved that the knowledge of the Neros, or the Neros, of 650 was acquired, the name TTL 650 was adopted in his name, and we have it in Mexico, where figures were known, but not syllabic letters, in the name of the deity Teotl. The periods show how far, at the time in which they branched off from Asia, the knowledge of the system had extended. Their period from the creation of Christ, of 5,200 years, embraces the 8 ages of their cycle. Their TTL, Teotl, 650 times 8 equals 5,200, corresponding with the period of Eusebius. In India, the name 360 fell into disuse and was lost, and was probably superseded by the words Titlu 666, TTL 650 plus IU or IU equals 16 equals 666, and at last by the number now used, TT 600. I know not how I could have invented anything more in accordance with my theory than that this Mexican god should have this peculiar appropriate name, had I set my wits to work for the purpose of invention. Teotl signifies in the Mexican language both the sun and an age, and the image of the sun, surrounded with rays, was the symbol of the latter. Mr. Fred Schlegel has observed the word Adel or Atel is found in the language of the east of Europe, that it meant water, and that its symbol was found its way into the Greek alphabet in the letter mem, in the undulating shape by which water is meant. Look at that, y'all. Yes, perfect. It matches so great. I love it. That is also in the Phoenician in most Western nations. It is in the Estotlan of Greenland, which is, I suspect, Dai, Ania, Istotel, and I suspect that it is the symbol of the centered letter and of water, because it is the symbol of fluid of any kind. I think this leads to the meaning of our word land, Alania, the holy country. Almost all persons who have written respecting the Mexicans have observed the similarity of their language to that of the Hebrews. This and many other strange things the monks admit most unwillingly and attribute to the devil. Las Casas said that the language of Saint Domingo was corrupt Hebrew. The Caribbees have the word Neketali, meaning dead, in Hebrew. Hilali, he is dead, in Hebrew. Kanich, a cane, sugar, in Hebrew. Inika, a collar, in Hebrew. Hunk. I don't know how to say that. Las Casas wrote an account of the Mexicans, in which we are told he states his belief that they are descended from the Jews. This account, by his desire, was never published. But why should he object to its being known that the Mexicans descended from the Jews? The reason is very evident. It was because he saw it was ridiculous, and he did not believe it himself. This book is in the Academy of History at Madrid. It was examined a few years ago by the government, but it was not thought proper to publish it. Lord Kingsborough gives the following passage. Las Casas' persuasion that the Indians were descended from the Jews is elsewhere mentioned, but as the words were discovered with some other reasons tending towards the same conclusion by Torquemada in some private papers containing the will of Las Casas, at the same time that great weight must be attached to the solemnly recorded an opinion. It cannot be said that that learned prelate was guilty of any indiscretion in promulgating it, but the contrary was proved by the proviso which he made respecting the publication of his history, that it should not be printed till 50 years after his death, and then only if it appeared good to the superior of his order, and for the benefit of religion, but that in the intermediate time no layman or young ecclesiastic was to be permitted to read it. The work has never been published, and Don Martin Fernandez de Navarrete says that when it was referred some years ago to the Academy of History at Madrid to take their decision respecting its publication, they did not think it convenient. So you see what's going on. They had already knew back even at this time what was going on, but they didn't find it convenient to publish it. They was like, hey, we're just not going to say anything because this isn't going to vibe with our control system and what we got going on. So, yeah, just let's not do this right now. Let's just keep things as they are. They can find out the truth on their own later, if they want to. They got free will. You know how they think. I now learn that permission has been given to Lord Kingsborough to copy it. The secreting practice is found to answer no longer. The old proverb applies. I shall be surprised if anything important be found in it, as much as I should have been to have heard that the French found many diamonds at Loreto when they got there, or secret learning in the Vatican Library when they got to Rome. Dr. Malcolm, in his essay on the antiquities of Britain, says, take it in the sense of Whitefleet, thus PM 12, which in substance amounts to this, etc. When the Spaniards were in the Magna Insula in Dice Haiti, when the bell rung for evening prayers, the Spaniards, according to custom, bowed their knees and signed themselves with the cross. The Indians did imitate them with great reverence, falling down on their knees and joining their hands together, rather, as I think, for imitation than for any other reason, though there are several who think that the Indians had the cross in veneration long before the arrival of Columbus. Gomorrah, Book 3, Chapter 32 tells that St. Andrew's Cross, which is the same with that of Burgundy, was in the very great veneration among the Cumans, and that they fortified themselves with the cross against the incursions of evil spirits, and were in use to put them upon newborn infants which thing very justly deserves admiration. Neither can it be conceived how such a right should prevail among savages unless they have learned this adoration of the cross from mariners or strangers who, being carried thither by the violence of tempests, have died or been buried there, which without all doubt would have also happened to that Andalusian pilot who died in the house of Columbus, unless he had been very skillful in the sea affairs, and so had observed his course, when he was hurried away with the force of the storms. It is very credible that many of those who are generally reckoned to have been foundered at sea did really meet with accidents of this kind. But the Accusa Millenes bring another reason of adorning the cross, and which seems near the truth, to wit, that they had received by tradition from their forefathers that formerly a man more glorious than the sun had passed through these countries and suffered on a cross. Here we have the mythos clear enough in Hispaniola. So, didn't come from somewhere else. The mythos is already clear enough that the cross originated here. So quit trying to bring it from somewhere else and saying that it was brought here. It wasn't brought here. The mythos is already clear. The Reverend Dr. Hyde, speaking of the priests of Peru, takes occasion to say, "No wonder the University of Oxford refused to print any more of his manuscripts. He was speaking of a virgin of Peru who was pregnant by the sun. The Reverend Doctors of Oxford did right not to publish his works while he lived and to destroy his manuscripts when he died. He ought to have been burnt himself." Whoa, what are they talking about? Acosta says that the Americans adorned the sea under the name of Mamacocha. I believe this was the marine Venus Mama Cochab. The Mexicans baptized their children in the water which they called the water of regeneration. The Mexican king danced before the god and was consecrated and anointed by the high priest with holy unction. On one day of the year, all the fires were put out and lighted again from one sacred fire in the temple, the practice of the Druids. Lord Kingsborough shows that the Messiah of the Jews is foretold to have an ugly or marred countenance, and that the Mexican Quetzalcoatl is said to have had the same. At the end of October, they had a festival exactly answering to our All Saints and All Souls. They called it the Festival of Advocates, because each human being had an advocate to plead for him. Thus, we have this festival throughout modern Europe, in Tibet, and in the ancient festival of the Druids, Saman, in Ireland, and in Mexico. This is Halloween, y'all. There is the story of the rebellious angels and the war in heaven. This is not from our Pentateuch. This is not from our Pentateuch. The rebellious angels and the war in heaven. Everything we've been talking about recently, y'all. If you ain't been with me on Brazier de Berg, hey, it's all, we get into it. Number 9. The Peruvians had a festival called the Festival of Capacreme. In the first month of their year, called Rame. Acosta supposes this was contrived by the devil in imitation of the Passover. It may be observed that all the acts of worship are directly avowed to the sun. The Mexicans sacrificed human victims, which Lord Kingsborough has shown was practiced by the Jews, who were, according to his lordship account, horrible cannibals. Georgius shows that the god Zaka was constantly called Sio. This was the Sio de Cutli, or god of fire, or god of years, or the everlasting one of the Mexicans. Volney says the Teleutians are a Tartar nation. Buddha was Hermes, and Hermes was Mercury, and Mercury was the god of merchants, and Buddha was Zaka and Saka, and the Mexican god of merchants was Yaca Tecutli. In the history of the Aztecs of Mexico, we find much respecting one Cocox, saved on a raft in a great flood. Now, when I consider that the Mexicans are so closely connected with North India, and that their accounts are all preserved by a mixture of hieroglyphics and unwritten tradition, I cannot help suspecting that this Cocox ought to be Sasox or Saksas. Nagualism is a doctrine known in American. Naga is softened or corrupted, and the hog of England, where the serpent is called Culebra. This is Colubra, and the followers of it are called Shavim. These are the Evites, or Hivites, or Ophites. Eve is Hiva, or Hiva. The Mexicans had a 40 days fast in memory of one of their sacred persons who was tempted 40 days on a mountain. He drinks through a reed. He is called the morning star, etc., etc. This must be the same person noticed before to have had a reed for an emblem. As Lord Kingsborough says, these are things which are very curious and mysterious. The inhabitants of Florida chant the word Hosanna in their religious service, and their priests were named Joannes. Sina is the ancient name of China. I suspect Sina or Sian or Siam are the same word. The god of Haiti was called Shokana. The C is evidently instead of the Asparate in Johanna. One of the temples has the name of Sinatiokali, that is, I suppose, the temple of Kali, the god of Sina or Sian. Lord Kingsborough says, the Mexicans honor the cross. They knew them, the Choribians, or Choribicheneses, which name differs from that of Chibibrias, the mother of Bacab, honor the cross. The Incas had a cross of very fine marble or beautiful jasper, highly polished of one piece, 3/4 of an ell in length and 3 fingers in width and thickness. It was kept in a sacred chamber of a palace and held in great veneration. The Spaniards enriched this cross with gold and jewels and placed it in the Cathedral of Cusco. The Mexican temples are in the form of a cross and face the 4 cardinal points. Quetzalcoatl is represented in the paintings of the Codex Borgianus nailed to the cross. Sometimes even the 2 thieves are crucified with him. In Volume 2, Plate 75, the god is crucified in the heavens in a circle of 19 figures, the number of the Metonic cycle. A serpent is depriving him from the organs of generation. In the Codex Borgianus, the Mexican god is represented crucified and nailed to the cross, and in another place hanging to it with a cross in his hands. And in one instance where the figure is not merely outlined, the cross is red, the clothes are colored, and the face and hands quite black. If this was the Christianity of the German Nestorius, how came he to teach that the crucified Savior was black? The name of the god who was crucified was Quetzalcoatl. I suspect this is Saka, or Saka, or Kaka, the Coatl, or god. The mother of Quetzalcoatl is called Xochiquetzal. May this be mother of Zaka, Xochi, or Suchiqueca, is both male and female. In the Codex Borgianus, the burial, descent into hell, and the resurrection are represented. And one of the plates the god is crucified on a mountain. I suspect that this is Prometheus. The Immaculate Conception is described. This is also described in Torquemada's Indian monarchy. The Mexican word Dios meant God, and he was called Ineffable. The Immaculate Conception is described in the Codex Vaticus. The Virgin Chimalman, also called Xochiquetzal, or Suchiquecal, was the mother of Quetzalcoatl. Xochiquetzal means the lifting up of roses. Eve is Yesenextli, and it is said she sinned by plucking roses. But in another place, these roses are called Fruta del Arbor. The Mexicans called the Father Isona, the son of Bacab, and the Holy Ghost, Echba. This, they say, they received from their ancestors. The Lakshmi of India is called Kri. Lakshmi is El Akhum. Kri is. These are the same as the Mexican Sintiotl, i.e. Sintiotl, and Sintiotl is Kan or Kuntiotl, the Kunti, the name of the female generative principle in India. The Mexican Eve is called Suchiquecal. A messenger from heaven announced to her that she should bear a son who should bruise the serpent's head. He presents her with a rose. This was the commencement of an age, which was called the Age of Roses. In India, this is called the Age of the Lotus. the water rose. Upon this, it may be observed that if this had been Papist forgery, the woman, and not the seed of the woman, would have bruised the head. It may also be observed that if this had come from the western part of the old world since the time of Constantine, it would certainly have had the woman, and not the seed of the woman. Gosh, this is so good. All this history, the monkish writer is perfectly certain, is the invention of the devil. He's saying it correlates so well, it has to be the work of a devil. Somebody did it. It doesn't make sense. Like, their mind is blown. It's hard for them to fathom that it all started here. But it's so true. Xochitl is called the Queen of Heaven. She conceived a son without connection with man, who is the god of air. This is the Immaculate Conception in the god Indra, whom we found crucified and raised from the dead in Nepal. The Mohammedans have a tradition that Christ was conceived by the smelling of a rose. Jeez, look at there. The temples of Quetzalcoatl were round. He was the inventor of temples in this form. In the 36th chapter of Marco Polo, an ancient account is given of the sacrifice in the province of Tanguth, a little north of Nepal, of a ram of a year old, which is said to be offered as a ransom for the child. The same is practiced among the Chinese. Torquemada says, two things are very remarkable. The first is that the parents of the children should have sold them and given them voluntarily for sacrifice. The second, that the sale itself should have taken place on the second day of this month, February, at the very time that we, who are Christians, celebrate the festival of the presentation of the Virgin without spot in the Temple of Jerusalem, holding in her arms her most blessed child, the Son of God, whose life was sold for the sin of the first woman who existed in the world, carrying him to present and make an offering of him, manifesting as it were to God the sacrifice which was afterwards to be accomplished on the tree of the cross. Jeez, that correlation there is hardcore. Oof. Number 11. Wow. Mr. Humboldt has written much respecting the Americans. It is a remarkable circumstance that it should never have occurred to him that the ignorance in the South Americans of the use of letters and iron were decisive circumstantial proofs of their very great antiquity, and their very early separation from the stock of the old world. But this great antiquity he considers proved from a variety of other circumstances. See, they don't want to account. Other circumstances, it had to have been this. We can't all come from America. Watch out, dodge it. He says, it cannot be doubted that the greater part of the nations of America belong to a race of men who, isolated ever since the infancy of the world from the rest of mankind, exhibit in the nature and diversity of language, in their features, and the conformation of their skull, incontestable proofs of an early and complete separation. Except in the article language, he is quite right. Malcolm shows that the tata, tauta, in the American language means father, in Irish dad, Welsh tad, or taduis, Armoric tat, Cornish dad, and tas, Scotch dad, St. Kilda tat, and in Guatemala tat, in Old Italy tata, in Egypt tate, in Greek teta, in Old English daddy, the American tauta, is the Indian tat. After showing at great length that the Mexicans must have had their mythology from Asia, east of the Indus, Mr. Humboldt observes that he finds among them neither the linga nor any of those figures with several heads and hands which characterize the paintings and figures of the Hindus. Well, guess what? Just because he didn't then, we have now, and it's deep. We just went through that, y'all, in Investigations Part 2 with the team. Y'all check that out. This ties right into it. They didn't know it then, but we just figured it all out recently. Shout out to the team. But he distinctly admits that he finds the doctrine of repeated regeneration in cycles. Now, this again seems to confirm my hypothesis that they migrated from the old world so early as to be these corruptions, early as the linga was. And it has induced me to review the early history of Buddhism, and to make me suspect that, in its early works, the linga is not to be found. But that's not true. Again, we found it. And that it has only come into use when the division between the followers of the linga and the Oni began to arise, which caused the horrible civil religious wars noticed in my former volume. See, he wasn't around to see that the linga was erected that we didn't have none here. Apparently he didn't know. Or, yeah, he didn't see none of them. So when he was speaking about it earlier, he had no clue what was going on. You know, they had a phallic worship, but he didn't really understand that we have them here. So 12, the founder of the Peruvian nation was called Bochica, the sun, an emblem of the sun. He was high priest of Soga, Mozo. Here we have Saga. His wife was called Chia. Chia is nothing but Eva, corrupted, Isis, or the moon. He was described with 3 heads. Here, I think, are the Buddha and Trimurti of India. His priests were called Zekwes and Zakwes. These are Zakas or Sagas, or priests of wisdom. You can also throw Nagas in there too, since we're talking about priests of wisdom. Humboldt says, the form of government given by Bochia or Bochica to the inhabitants of Bogota is very remarkable from its analogy with those of Japan and Tibet. The Incas of Peru united in their person the temporal and spiritual powers. The children of the sun were both priests and kings. The pontiffs, or lamas, the successors of Bochica, were considered as heirs of his virtue and sanctity. The people flocked in crowds to offer presents to the high priest, visiting those places which were consecrated by the miracles of Bochica. In a very particular and pointed manner, this Bochica is said to be white, or albus. This reminds me of the Sibyl pronounces the white so of Alba to be black. This reminds me that the Sibyl pronounces the white so of Alba to be black. Alba means white. Was Bochica Alba, or LB, L50B252. See, they play codes with these white and black words too. So you see what I'm saying right here? And this is something I kind of learned from Seven Bomar. So you got to watch out what will be going down with this stuff. He had a peculiar cycle of 13 years and another of 4 13s, or 52. This looks as if there was some reference to our astrological instrument called playing cards, which certainly came from North India. This does not seem so wonderful when we consider that we have just found their cycles, the same as the indictions of Constantine. What is the Romish alb? The Peruvians believed in one supreme being, the creator of heaven and earth, called Viracocha, and Pachacamac, who had revealed to them his religion. The Mexicans called their great god Yao Ineffable, and represented him by an eye in a triangle. The Mexicans called their great god Yao Ineffable, and represented him by an eye in a triangle. The cross was everywhere adored. The Mexicans expected a Messiah. The history of the flood is almost a close copy of that of Moses. Their baptism in the presence of witness is almost the same as that of the Jews and Persians, and in the same manner they named their children and offered them in the temple. The same as that of the Jews? It's because they are the Jews, the original Jews. Before it went over there and they migrated. Things moved around. They had the custom of sacrificing the firstborn, the same as the Jews, till it was done away by Abraham or Moses. They had also the rite of circumcision. Their temples were in the form of a cross and faced the 4 cardinal points. Their language has many Greek and Hebrew words in it. They practiced auricular confession. They have a sacred and select word like the Indian Om, which is never spoken, but what it is, I do not find mentioned. So y'all know what that is. Please let me know. Shout out. Number 13. The union of the Jewish and the Christian mythos in one system instead of their division into 2 systems at once proves that they cannot have been brought to Mexico at different and distant periods. You see? So they have the original in its one form before it gets split off into 2. So we've gone through this, right? Because we understand that Moses and everybody and their understandings and how they went as far as their beliefs before it was split, it was different. It wasn't what we have now, okay? And so by understanding that, they understood the male and the female principles. It wasn't just about the male and it wasn't just about the female. It was about understanding both. And he's showing here that in Mexico we have that, while everywhere else we show the division of the religion in its pure original form. Had this been the case, there would have been two religions, and in all other cases in opposition to one another. It is wonderful circumstances that the Jews coming from the city of Egypt built by Alexandria should have forgot to bring with them the knowledge of letters and iron, and still more wonderful that the Christian monks coming in later day should have had equally bad memories. So again, right there, what's going on too is he's saying that if the Egyptians did settle North America or any America aspect, then they would have brought the iron or understanding of iron as well, and letters, but it's all hieroglyphs here, baby. So that shows it's more recent than America itself. It's still more wonderful that the Christian monks coming in a later day should have had equally bad memories. All that was necessary was for those Jews to have told the skillful smelters of metals that by melting the lumps of their native iron in a wood fire, they would get iron and steel. So you see, that's a great point. The identity of the Mexican and Chinese of North Indian mythos being unquestionable attempts have been made in several periodical publications to account for their similarity by supposing that the Mexicans were the colonies fleeing from the arms of Mohammedan or Tartarian conquerors. But the writers do not tell us how the Jewish and Christian doctrines came to be found in America, mixed most intimately together, and also with the idolatry of North India and Greece. Other writers contend that these colonists were Mongol or Tartar conquerors, who, not contented with the conquest of China, conquered America also. But this leaves all the great difficulties I have stated above unremoved. It is a most wonderful thing that these Tartarian heroes did not take with them the knowledge of iron and letters, and that they, being Mohammedans, should convey the Christian religion to the Mexicans instead of that of Muhammad. Oh, so easy to defeat those little fantasies. So, it is also wonderful that they should take with them the knowledge of the horse and the ass, though they did not take these animals themselves. Pictures of them being seen everywhere, mixed with their other hieroglyphs, and, what is still more, as the reader will instantly see, mixed most intimately with the Judean mythos, a hero mounted on an ass or a horse, sometimes carrying a sword, sometimes a cross. It is impossible, on viewing them, not to recollect the procession of Jesus Christ on the ass into Jerusalem. The mythos are evidently identical, but their variations show that they are not copies, though they have plenty of pictures of the horse, the animal, be it observed, noticed in the Revelation. They have no knowledge of the elephant or camel, but these were not in the Revelation, were no part of the mythos. They have no sheep, but they have an animal like it, which they call the llama or lamb. No part of the Mexican hieroglyphs is more striking than the exhibition of the horse or ass, for some are doubtful, animals, totally unknown in a state of nature to the Americans. That's BS. I refer to the plates figures. Faria y Sosua. The Jesuit says that when the Portuguese arrived in the Azores, they found the statue cut on the side of a mountain of a man on horseback, wearing a cloak, his left hand on the horse's mane, his right pointing to the west, with an inscription on the lower rock, but not understood. It is necessary to observe here that tribes, both of Negroes and bearded men, were found in South America. The Codex Vaticanus, Volume 2 is marked 3738. The plates in it are numbered to 146, but the explanation goes only to plate 92, in either English or Spanish. The explanation purports to being in Volume 6 on page 155 of Lord Kingsborough's work. My reader has only to look to the figures of the crucifixes, which I have given, figure 12 and 14, and to reflect for one moment upon the admitted anxiety of the Spaniards and the popes to keep the knowledge of these things from the European world, to see why the explanation of the Codex Vaticanus ends with plate 92. The remainder has no doubt been suppressed to avoid the necessity of giving an explanation of the crucifixes. So you see, even right now, the Codex Vaticanus, well, maybe not right now, but at that time, the Codex Vaticanus, Volume 2, they have it numbered up to 146 plates, but they only go to plate 92, and so leading Lord Kingsborough, and apparently figure 12 and 14, which there's no figures in this book, so that's what's crazy. Yeah, they're cutting it out in this book for some reason, this copy. Upon the admitted anxiety, explanation. So they have to give an explanation, and they wasn't going to, and they still don't want to this day. I don't think. I don't know if they have or not. Why? Because it just kills everything about their false fantasy being over there. It didn't happen over there. It happened over here. We everywhere meet with the Mexican divine names ending in as Dios, that is, Dio, or God. It has been observed by Lord Kingsborough, as well as by almost all the Spanish authors, that the Mexican language is so full of Hebrew words as to be almost Hebrew. Now, when they're speaking about this too, which language are they speaking about? Are they speaking Nahuatl? So are they saying that the Nahuatl is straight Mexican language? Looks as so, you know. We have seen the God everywhere crucified and suspended from the cross. We have found the sacred animal of llama or sheep. We have found the mythos of the crucified Savior. We have found everything, at last, to center in the Son. The word tl is confessed, not to be understood by the Mexicans nor by the Spaniards who call it, for that reason, merely a termination. All these matters are considered. I think it may be the same word as the tla, the Hebrew name for the sign of the zodiac, Agnes or Aries. In Hebrew it means, when spelt with the ta, tl, hanged or suspended. I believe it meant crucified by hanging on a cross. It was originally Buddha, as noticed before, for the same reason that the word meaning 650 was applied to him. It was in succession applied to the God of wisdom, to the Lamb, his second emblem, and to the crucified God, Krishna. 14. All the Mosaic history is to be found in China, according to Monsei Perove, in which he only repeats what was before pointed out by Butter Joron, de Guinness, etc. The Chinese historians relate that one of their ancient despots endeavored to destroy their old records, but that a copy of their history was called Chowking escaped. That book treats of the terrestrial paradise, its rivers, waters of immortality, its admirable trees, fall of the angels, and of man, and of the appearance of that at that moment of mercy. That's all there. You see, they're talking about America. Also of the Sabbath, confusion of tongues, the manna in the wilderness, the Trinity, and of the Holy One in the West, who was an incomprehensible, and the one with the Tien. It says that the world cannot know the Tien except by the Holy One, and only can offer a sacrifice acceptable to the Chang Ti. What does that sound like, y'all? The nations are waiting for him like plants for a refreshing shower. The Tien is the Holy One, invisible. Yao, the ineffable, and the Holy One is the Tien made visible and teaching men. Okay, Quetzalcoatl, right? The Morning Star. All this was taught by Confucius 550 years before Christ. Okay, so it didn't come from Christ is what we're saying. We way before that. America way before that. And then it got taken over there to China. You see what I'm saying? Then it was understood over there. And then Christ came about. But they don't want to talk about that. That's the problem. Like, all these religions don't want to educate themselves and learn about this. Because it, like, demolishes what they believe in the first place as far as accurate history. And that's unfortunate. I understand that. But why not just accept that you was taught wrong? It's okay. Ancient inscriptions state the Jews to have come into China about the time of Confucius. This is probably the arrival of a colony or doctrine of a new incarnation going forth from the western Ayodhya. The secret doctrine of the renewed incarnation seems, by being misunderstood, to have operated with them precisely as it did with their Indian and Tibetan neighbors, for they are the Tibetan or Buddhist faith, into which all these doctrines dovetail perfectly. These facts and many more are detailed from different authors by the learned Nimrod. All these things, good people, like Nimrod, suppose were taught to the Tartars and Chinese by the lost tribes of Samaria. Those tribes are most useful people. They account for every difficulty. In the east, in the west, in the north, in the south, they are always ready at hand. Here is all the Jewish and the Christian mythos amalgamated precisely as it is in Mexico, in Tibet, North India, and South India, all carrying with it proofs of the almost universal prevalence or dissemination. But notwithstanding that we find remnants of this mythos everywhere, the actual character of which cannot be doubted, yet in the respective countries where they are found, the system is obsolete. They are remnants of an almost forgotten system, you see? Only remnants. They everywhere carry traits of the system of regeneration or of the cycles recorded in the old druidical cycles or cyclopean monuments found along with them, the origin of which is acknowledged to be totally unknown. Yeah, okay. There cannot be any doubt that they have all flowed from the same fountain, have the same origin, and the only question will be whether they flowed from the kingdom of the West, which Herodotus could not find, and Alexander thought it not worth his while to notice, or from the kingdom of Ayodhya of India, with its capital probably, as appears from its ruins, once the largest in the world, a city larger than London, the capital of an empire more extensive than Europe. There is scarcely a page of Lord Kingsborough's work which does not exhibit proofs of the anxiety of the Spanish government to suppress the information which I have just now detailed, and which does not, and it's still to this day, that it comes to us through the medium of the most unwilling of witnesses. Listen, guys, if they didn't want us to have this, to know the truth, we wouldn't have it. They're waiting for us to reclaim what is ours, but it comes with knowledge. Okay? We have to come together as a nation of people to stand up and take back what is ours. You want your own system, you stand up and claim it, knowing what you are. There's no denying it anymore. There's nothing to be scared of. All you have to do is have the wisdom and stand up together. All we have to do is come together. Every contrivance which was possible was restored in order to prevent its arrival in Europe, and this accounts for the extraordinary and systematic opposition to the admission of strangers into New Spain. All people likely to be intelligent, such as physicians, persons suspected of heresy, etc., were prohibited from going thither. Okay? They weren't allowing them to come over here. You understand that? The reason assigned by the Spanish government was that they were prevented going, that they might not create disputes and prevent conversions. What conversions? To Christianity? Come on, guys. The author of the notes to Lord Kingsborough's book says that he believes that the Jews colonized America and held it for 1,000 years, and that they introduced, as it must have been along with their own, the Christian rites into the religion of the Mexicans, who had never heard of Christianity, to show their hatred of Christianity and to turn it into ridicule. Oh my gosh. And that it was for this reason that they established the Christian doctrines along with those of the Jews, such as the resurrection, ascension, etc. The passage is so extraordinary that I think the writer must have meant it for a joke. See? Exactly. The close connection between the Americas and the Old World was long ago seen, notwithstanding all the exertions of the Spaniards to keep mankind in the dark, and fruitless endeavors were made by Grotius and others to find a cause for it. An account of them may be seen in Basnaj. It is there observed that one of the districts has a German name, Estotland, that the name of a young sheep is Lam, that one of their gods is called Theut, and one of their kings, Theuk. Evidently the same name. That their great creative principle was called Pachakama. Biakama, that is, Bi-Akam, the wisdom of divine love, that they baptize their children in the form of the cross and have a notion of the Trinity, that they adorn their idols with the cross and mitre, that they have a kind of your Christ, that virgins consecrated to God make effigies of paste and honey, which they consecrate with much ceremony and afterward distribute to the people who believe they eat the body of their God. The people of North America were thought by Penn to have an unaccountable likeness to the Jews, and the Mashachete were thought to be found in Massachusetts. Tibet is called Dangutia. This is evidently Dangut, the country of Dangut. The close similarity of the Trinitarian and other doctrines of the Tibetans to those of the Romish Christians we have seen. It is surely a very extraordinary thing to find the Peruvian triune god called Danga, evidently the same as the god of Tibet, both in name and character. The Mexican courts are shown to have had exactly the same number of judges as those of the Jews, that their sacred numbers were exactly the same, and that both nations kept fast for exactly the same number of days. Lord Kingsborough says, the common law of every state in Europe has been confessedly modeled after the Mosaic law. This is a very important observation, and I think its truth will not be disputed, but I think there is no other way of accounting for it than to go to my primeval nation. The common law in most states is evidently older than Christianity. We are told that St. Augustine brought Christianity into this island in the year 596, but was there no Christianity in the time of Constantine or before? Lord Kingsborough says, the affinity between the Mexican and the Hebrew laws is greater than between the latter and those of any nation with which we are acquainted. They circumcised with a stone knife, the use of which was expressly ordered. It is remarkable that the circumcision of the Jews should have been performed with a knife made of stone, which is emphatically noticed in the Bible. Now, Easter Islands may be considered to be a part of America. The most remarkable curiosity in this island is a number of colossal statues on the east side of the island, where seen the ruins of the 3 platforms of stonework, on each of which had stood 4 of these large statues, but they were all fallen down from the 2 of them, and 1 from the 3rd. They were broken and defaced by the fall. One was 15 feet long and 6 feet broad. Over the shoulders, each statue had on its head a large, cylindric stone of red color, wrought perfectly round. Others measured nearly 27 feet, and upwards of 8 feet on the shoulders, and still larger one was seen standing, the shade of which was sufficient to shelter all the party of Captain Cook, who reports this from the Sun. The workmanship is rude, but not bad, nor are the features on the face ill-formed. The ears are long, according to the disproportion practiced in this land, and the bodies have hardly anything of human figure about them. How these islanders, wholly unacquainted with any mechanical power, could raise such stupendous figures and afterwards place large cylindric stones upon their heads is truly wonderful. It is observed that the most probable conjecture is that the stone is factitious, meaning that they, made the stone. It wasn't, carved like that. So they used earth, and then it's so old it's just become fossilized into stone like it is now. The island is about 10 or 12 leagues in circumference and must be in the Gulf of California. But see Cook and Foster's Voyage, March 1774. The Encyclopedia Londinensis says the names of the 2 statues left standing are Dago and Tarico. Here we have Dagon and Taurus. Surely nothing can be more curious than these statues. Who placed them here? And when were they set up? 17. Everyone must remember the accounts of the perfect horror with which the unhappy Mexicans viewed the first horses, which the Spaniards took over to their country. This I will now account for. It appears from Lord Kingsborough's book, etc., that they had all the mythos which had been so fully explained of the old world, or should we say the new world, the Immaculate Conception, the crucifixion, the resurrection after 3 days, the expectation of the return of their crucified Savior, etc., etc. Every Indian inquirer knows that the last avatar was always expected by the people of Java to come mounted on a white horse. Now we're talking about the Apocalypse, Revelation. Now, in several of the Mexican hieroglyph pictures, though their owners knew nothing of the horse, an animal, which might be either a horse or an ass, is painted. In these same pictures, the other parts of the mythos, the crucifixion, etc., are described. From this, it is evident that although they were not able to convey the horse over the sea, yet they could convey every part of the mythos. The result of this was that when the Spaniards arrived in flying machines, or machines propelled by the winds, which would be ships on the wings of the wind, across the boundless ocean, or from heaven, their commander mounted on the unknown animal described in their ancient pictures to be that on which the promised God was to come, and carrying in his hands thunder and lightning, with which he destroyed his enemies at miles' distance from him. He was believed to be the last avatar. Lord Kingsborough gives a very interesting account of the effect which this superstition or belief had upon their conduct, taking away from most of them from devotion. All wished to resist their God, mounted on his horse and surrounded by thunder and lightning, and from others, through fear, all power, thus giving to their cruel enemies an easy victory. I cannot conceive it possible to devise anything more conclusive of the truth of my whole system than this. All this accounts for numbers of circumstances relating to the conduct of Montezuma and his people, which have hitherto been utterly unintelligible. And I think it seems evident that if the miscreants from Spain had really understood their own case, they would have had nothing to do but to have quietly taken possession of the whole empire as its last avatar and newly arrived god. Well, indeed, might Peter Martyr, Las Casas, and Torquemada be puzzled with the horse, the actual horse of the revelation, in a country where the people had not the knowledge of the animal, or indeed of any animal of the old world, instead of accepting the passage of the empire peaceably offered to them. By a most absurd and extraordinary mistake, the Spaniards determined to terrify the people by ill usage, the account of which is given in the Antiquities of Mexico. 18. Colonel Todd states that the mountains above Tibet, the highest ridge of Asia to be called Andes, these must have been the countries of Tungusians. It is impossible on reading this not to recollect the Andes in the Tanga of Peru, and it is equally impossible to attribute this paranomasia and the other circumstances already described to accident. They're saying there's no accident here. They can see that it's a replica. To account for this, I look into ancient histories and I adopt the first rational and philosophical cause which is recorded. And if you've gone through with me on anything Anacalypsis, you know that Godfrey Higgins don't play. He goes very deep. And this is pretty sound research, y'all. If it's coming out of Godfrey Higgins, you already know what's up. These are some of the best, without a lot of conjecture. And without the difficulty I find it in the communication formed by the island of Atlantis of Plato, for the subsequent submerging of such an island or continent is neither improbable nor irrational, but when the antecedent circumstances are considered, a dry historical fact, carrying probability on the face of it, it is no more improbable than the effects we see produced by volcanoes every day. Okay? Understanding what's going on? Okay? Do you understand? Atlantis? Where's that? America. How? We see the same effects produced by volcanoes every day. It is neither impossible nor improbable that when the Atlantis sunk, something of the same kind should have happened in the northern Pacific Ocean. The legend of the sinking of a very large island is now well known in China and Japan, and in both places of an old festival is kept to celebrate the escape of an excellent prince called Birun. I cannot help suspecting an identity of mythos or an identity of fact. I apprehend, if the whole or great part of the Polynesian islands constituted the highest grounds of a large continent which sunk, the effect would be, when the sinking took place, to raise up the water so as to drown all the inhabitants, and after a short time to subside and leave the points of the mountains dry as islands. After all, a great difficulty must be allowed to exist in all the speculations on this subject arising from the fact that there are none of the animals of the continent found in the other. So see this book from Mr. Cuvier's opinion on the part of this subject. Now, the Mexicans in their histories already say that they arrived from the present country from the west. They always persist more strenuously that it was from the west they came, and they describe towns on the coast where they remained for many years in their progress to their present situation, the ruins of which they assert are yet to be seen. They say they came across the sea from another country. Now, was this Atlantis or not? It is very desirable that the remains of the towns should be sought for. Lord Kingsborough has gone to an enormous length in proving that the Mexican rites, ceremonies, etc., were almost precisely the same as those of the Jews, and that they must consequently have been brought by the Jews to Mexico. But one most important observation offers itself on this. We possess what we believe to be the knowledge of all the Jewish rites, history, etc., in Syria. But this is not the way all these things are known by the Americans. All the things said to have taken place in western Syria, both the Jews and Christians, are said to have been acted in America, and the case, in a great measure, is the same in India and China. You see what I'm saying? So what he's sitting over here saying is that, yeah, we know all about them. We possess what we believe to be all the knowledge of them. You know what I'm saying? But how do they? Like everything, right? There is the same standing still of the sun, the same Fugia, the same deluge, and persons saved in a ship, the same immaculate conception, the same crucifixion and resurrection, but they were all in the American country, not in Syria. Not in Syria. Not in Syria. Now, it is very improbable that if the Jews of Western Judea or of Moses had gone in a body from their old country, they would never ever wish or permit their history to be located in the new one, for towers of Babel to be built, waters to be passed, or places to be shown where the sun stood still. Nothing can account for all this except that in all countries, including among the Western Judea, it was the figurative description of the renewed avatars. Figurative description of renewed avatars. Everything originally is in America, and everything over there is a figurative description of renewed avatars. It seems to me that the mythos, which I have shown to have universally prevailed, accounts in a satisfactory manner, with one exception, for all the difficulties. Parts of it we have seen everywhere, a small part of it in one place and a small part in another, but all, including the Jewish, the same mythos. The discovery of the same system in America as that in South India, in North India, in Tibet, in Western Syria, etc., proves that at some extremely remote era, the same mythos must have prevailed, and the variations which we find, whilst at the same time the general character is preserved, are what we may naturally expect would arise as time advanced. You see what I'm saying? Everything that's transpiring is what we could expect would arise as it has progressed the time. Things change, they forget, they lose sight, they expand over time. The religion mutates as we see. What we have now are the debris of the original system. Number 19. We must recollect that the neglect to teach the Mexicans the arts of writing and making iron cannot be attributed merely to a few stray mariners and fishermen blown across the ocean. The knowledge of the Americans, if carried to them at all in later times, must have been carried by regular colonies from Greece who taught them the rites and name of Bacchus, of colonies from Syria who taught them all the minute parts of the Judean mythos, of colonies from Tartary and China, who taught them the knowledge of the mythoses of those countries, of colonies from Europe, who taught them the modern but not Baptist Christianity. So you see what they're saying? What he's saying here? They would have had to come over here and teach them all these mythos of all these different nations, and then have them intertwine and change everything that they originally were doing into now an intermixture of all of these mythos put together, which directly match up to the Jews. How much sense does that make to y'all? That don't make no sense. Is there a human being so credulous as to believe that all these colonies or parties of migrations following one another, time after time, should have admitted to convey the knowledge of iron and letters? So he's saying that they would have taught them all of this religious stuff, all of these practices, but y'all ain't gonna teach them about no iron and letters? Come on, cuz, it don't make no sense. I am sure no person will be found to believe this. Then, what are we to believe? But that one great and learned race held all these doctrines as taught by me in a period of the world when the intercourse between the old and the new worlds was easily compared with what it is at this time. The one exception alluded to above is the difficulty of accounting for means by which the system reached America. To meet this, may we not have recourse to the formerly named island of Atlantis, of the submersion of which we are informed by Plato, and which, I suppose, almost connected the two worlds? It was probably so near both, or it was it, that, in the frail boats of those days, colonies could pass, but in which the large animals could not be conveyed. Of course, the submersion must have taken place and cut off the communication between the two worlds before the knowledge of letters and the use of iron. It cannot be believed that if ever the Mexicans had been told of the existence of use of iron, excellent refiners and smelters of metals as they were, that they would not instantly have obtained it from their mountains, where it is found in its native state. I shall be asked how they could have passed in any great numbers without the means of conveying the horse, the cow, the sheep. For if the two worlds were nearly connected by an intermediate island or islands, the passage of the animals would have taken place. I admit the force of the argument in its fullest extent, as I do the difficulty of accounting for the extraordinary fact that there were none of the animals of the old world in America. However, at last, an intimate connection between the two worlds must be admitted to have existed, and to have existed before the knowledge of iron or letters, and the countries the Mexicans came from. Some persons have thought that the Americans were colonies who passed by the north, where the continents join, or nearly join, and to the question why they have not the horse, it may be replied that if the natives of Tartary or China immigrated by north, and were actually these people in the first place, is what he's getting at. Not to saying that they didn't, they came, ain't nobody doubting that. We had these people come, we got clear documentation of, people coming and fighting and demolishing the Hebrew nations here. Of course, they didn't go by all the names that are given to us later in the Bible. They had separate and distinct names native to this nation, because that's what it is. But either way, it's okay. But what he's saying is that the natives of Tartary or China and being immigrated here and then being the Hebrews is not the case. In the neighborhood of the Arctic Circle, as it must have been in that route, there is reason to believe that the horse could not have conveyed through this cold climate, perhaps could have not lived there. It is said that the northeast of Tartary is too cold for this animal, and that there are none. If we admit this, then we may suppose that the migration took place from China, where the Hebrew language was spoken, and where the Hebrew and Christian systems flourished. See, he still won't let it go, as it has been shown to have done in a very early period. And if the immigrants went from China, we may thus account for their going without taking with them the knowledge of syllabic writing. So here we go. If we suppose a body of Japanese or Chinese amounting only to a few thousand on their arrival in Mexico after journeying for 40 or 50 years, we may readily suppose that they would increase to 200 or 300 millions in 500 or 600 years in that fine soil and climate. But to suppose we account for their ignorance of letters and the want of horses, cows, and etc. in this manner, this will not account for the ignorance of iron, and at the same time for the knowledge of the mythos of all the nations which I have just now enumerated. Did you hear him? Of all the nations. The mythos of all the nations. Why? Because it originated here, yo. The Gulf of Mexico is the true Fertile Crescent. Y'all gotta go back to my origins of civilization from what we going through right now. Brazil Dibberberg's translations. And satisfactorily to account for this, I am convinced we must ultimately go to my hypothesis, which naturally and easily explains the difficulties. Lord Kingsborough's work is unquestionably the most magnificent ever undertaken by an individual. It is indeed an honor to his order and to his country. The bringing together into the one view, by means of lithographic copies, the different manuscripts from different and distant countries will prove indeed, has already proved, of the greatest importance to science, and must greatly aid the philosopher in his inquiries. So I hope y'all enjoyed this one. There's not much I can say else than that. I know this was long, but hey, Godfrey Higgins got us. Anacalypsis Volume 1 and Volume 2, baby. From a misunderstanding to an understanding. Let's go.